are the lawn, that classic symbol of suburban life. They make up 70% of city green spaces and they cover millions of hectares globally. They're functional as areas for relaxation and activities, they're aesthetically pleasing, and they're plants, so they're good for the environment, right? Right? Unfortunately, our yards aren't nearly as green as they look. Grass lawns are often a monoculture, which means a single species is taking up the entirety of a given area. This is a problem because when one plant dominates an environment, it reduces biodiversity, or the variety of life present. You see, a single plant species can't support anywhere near the number of organisms that a diverse community of plants can. In fact, short mown lawns are so lacking in biodiversity that they're known as biological deserts. Even though they're made up of living plants, they're barren landscapes. Ecosystems rely on the complex interactions between organisms to be self-sustaining. And when you remove enough of those organisms, or even just a few key players, the ecosystem can't survive. That's not the end of it though, no, because now we have a monoculture that can't naturally sustain itself that we have to help by dousing in artificial fertilizers, chemical pesticides, and herbicides. These products either seep into the soil or enter freshwater systems as runoff, spreading pollution well past the perimeters of the lawn. They also use way more water than they're worth, sometimes taking up to 50% of a homeowner's water usage. Which makes sense when you realise that most turf grass is made up of European species, so they aren't adapted for most of the climates they're planted in. And they tend to be sourced from global nurseries that stock a limited number of species, so now we've got suburban habitats in different parts of the world that are all very similar in species composition. This ecological homogenization means that invasive species have a much easier time adapting to urban landscapes than a lot of native animals do. Surely it can't all be bad though. Grass traps carbon, so having a lawn should reduce your carbon footprint, right? Well, it's true, grass does a decent job of sequestering atmospheric carbon, but 1 hour of using a fossil fuel powered lawnmower is the equivalent of going on a 160-kilometre car trip, so the benefits are kind of negated here. And that's not even getting into the expense of all that lawn care. So, if lawns are this problematic, time-consuming and environmentally harmful, how did they become so popular and why do we keep them around? Why? Why do we keep them around? Lawns originated in Europe around castles where a clear stretch of land was needed to see incoming enemies. They weren't always made up of a single species. It's actually thought that these early lawns were comprised of herbs like thyme and chamomile and were kept short by allowing sheep and cattle to graze them. Lawns made up of closely mown grass became popular with the aristocracy in the 17th century, one famous example being the Green Lawns of Versailles. Because these massive lawns took a lot of care and manpower to maintain, they were seen as a symbol of wealth. Lawns were almost exclusive to large private properties and public areas like parks and commons until the Industrial Revolution. You see, as cities became more industrialised, they also became more polluted and smog-filled. Everyone was like, nah, actually this sucks, and those that could afford it moved out of the cities and into more spacious properties that they could simply commute to work from. Property developers made the most of this mass exodus, designing houses complete with beautiful green lawns to make the suburbs seem even more like an idyllic escape from the polluted urban centres. A second boom in suburban development came after the Second World War, when even more subdivisions were being built to meet the demand created by returned soldiers, who were starting families and seeking out affordable housing in calm, stress-free environments. Within these suburban communities, the importance of a short, weed-free lawn was emphasised constantly, and led to a culture of extreme judgment if your lawn was messy or unkempt, a culture that's still pervasive in a lot of communities today. The invention of the lawnmower had made life easier when it came to keeping grass length at acceptable levels, but there were still weeds to contend with. At this time, not all weeds were unwelcome. The presence of clover was seen as a sign of a healthy lawn, and it was. Clover is great at absorbing and fixing atmospheric nitrogen to create a natural soil fertiliser. As a flowering plant, clover served as a major source of sustenance for pollinators like bees in the degraded suburban landscape. However, plenty of other plants that were arbitrarily seen as unsightly were also growing on lawns. Constantly pulling these up was a pain, so something easier had to be found. This is where herbicides came in. The problem with herbicides is they get rid of everything but turf grass, including clover, and companies knew customers wouldn't want to buy a product that killed off an important part of their lawn. Their solution? Develop a product that kills weeds while keeping clover alive, of course. Just kidding, that would cost money and time, so instead they ran extensive ad campaigns to repaint clover as an invasive, unsightly weed. It worked, and the suburban lawn's final form as a heavily mown desert of grass riddled with chemical residue from pesticides, herbicides, and artificial fertilizer was cemented. So we've identified the lawn problem. We know why we have this problem. What's next? Well, the good news is there's actually a few options to fix this in a relatively short time frame. Two general methods of making a yard more eco-friendly are the evolutionary and revolutionary approaches. The evolutionary approach involves making small changes to the way you manage your yard. For example, it's been found that mowing on a less intensive schedule reduces the spread of invasive species and can help restore some biodiversity to your garden. The evolutionary approach also involves watering less with greater efficiency and reducing or completely getting rid of chemical pesticides. An even better way of helping our ecosystems is through the revolutionary approach, where you switch out exotic grass species in your lawn for native species or get rid of the lawn altogether. In fact, one of the best things you can do for the local ecosystem is support the growth of native plants through rewilding, a movement centered around returning the environment to its original state. Native plants require a lot less maintenance because they're already adapted to the climate and rainfall patterns of your area. They also improve soil quality through the diversity of species present, and a well-established garden will help prevent invasive weeds from taking root. Not only that, plants that have deeper roots do a much better job of trapping atmospheric carbon, meaning you're actively reducing your carbon footprint by making the switch. Native plants are, of course, the best option for supporting native wildlife, so by planting them, you're increasing the biodiversity of your garden even further. Flowering plants support native pollinators, including native bee species, which need all the help they can get right now. If insects bug you, they can still be controlled by providing shelter for animals that eat bugs. So for example, building a bat box or a rock stack for lizards, or even installing a pond to support populations of frogs and dragonflies. This method of gardening is becoming more popular, but it has faced some resistance because wilder gardens are deemed less presentable. Even if one person wants to rewild their garden, they may feel pressure to keep the traditional lawn. This is because of something that homeowners experience called an ecology of prestige, meaning an individual's landscaping and gardening habits are influenced by those around them. If the neighbours are going to respect you more when they see an immaculate, closely mown lawn, you'll be more likely to go with that over something more eco-friendly. On the contrary, if you plant native flowers, your neighbours are more likely to notice the benefits and want to do the same. So, if you live in an area full of perfectly manicured lawns with water-guzzling turf, your decision to switch it up and support native biodiversity might just encourage others in your community to do the same. And every individual that does this is helping to support the ecosystem of their entire region. I've added some general resources in the description for increasing garden biodiversity if you want to check those out. And most regions have local organisations and Facebook groups that discuss and give advice on creating native gardens. When we look at the scope of the current ecological crisis, it can be easy to feel helpless. But rewilding is something that we as individuals can do to help support our ecosystems. And if enough of us do it, we can make the biological deserts of our suburbs a thing of the past.